The Gospel according to John. When Judas had gone out, Jesus said, "Now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and will glorify him at once. Little children, I am with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and as I said to the Jewish leaders, so now I say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Christ. You may be seated. Well, it is certainly a festive day here at Emmaus. New members, a baptism, even an annual meeting. There is much to be joyful about today. I always love New Member Sundays because they are a visible demonstration of the values of this community. What values might those be? Any guesses? Any guesses? Welcome. Yes, I heard it. Welcome. But welcome itself is really just a manifestation of a greater value that roots us and anchors us in our life together. Love. Love is what compels us to welcome others into this covenantal community. Love is what God uses to draw people together for a common mission. In our welcome of new members, we affirm our baptismal promises together, which empower us for that mission. I'm so grateful that all of our new members have chosen to join in God's work here at Emmaus. This is also a big Sunday, of course, because today we get to celebrate a new birth of sorts. In a few moments, we will welcome Kalia Scott into this community in a new and powerful way through the waters of baptism. Though Kalia has been a beloved part of our community since she was about 5 years old, she joins us in a new way today. For it is through the waters of baptism that we enter into our covenant with God and with one another. In my conversations with Kalia, we've talked about how the waters of baptism are both a place of death and new life. Baptism is a place of death because in baptism, our tethers to sin, those connections that hold us and bind us, are severed, and our old ways are put to rest. Baptism is a moment in which we are united with Christ's death. Baptism is a place of life as well, because as we rise from the waters of baptism, we participate in the resurrection life of Jesus Christ. Baptism is a beautiful and sacred gift of God's grace to us, because in those waters, we are claimed as God's own. We take on new life, just as surely as Jesus defeated the power of sin and death and was raised by God's love. Now, God's love is central to our understanding of baptism, but it's also central to our gospel for this morning, where we find Jesus' disciples at a very critical juncture in the story of how Jesus neared the end of his life. In John's telling of this story, the intention of Judas to betray Jesus has just been set, and Judas has gone out to implement that betrayal. Jesus knows that Judas' betrayal has set in motion his end. And so, Jesus chooses carefully his next words to his disciples. First, he promises that his betrayal, bad as it is directly connected to his exaltation. He even goes so far as to call it his glorification, because he knows that God will use his crucifixion his exaltation on the cross to bring all people to himself. Next, he calls his disciples little children. And in doing that, he foretells that they will look for him when he is gone, but reminds them that they can follow him only later. Where I am going, you cannot come. It's then, when they've received this bad news, that he at last gives them what he calls a new commandment, to love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. You can imagine that this command to love one another, just as Jesus had loved them, might have come as a bit of shock to the disciples. After all, Jesus was, well, Jesus. I mean, you can imagine his disciples feeling like they might have a hard time following that commandment. I mean, love each other just like Jesus loved them? How are they supposed to do that? Jesus is to love what LeBron James is to basketball. Jesus is to love what Simone Biles is to gymnastics. Jesus is to love what the Mona Lisa is to those ineffably beautiful but also kind of creepy 16th century Italian Renaissance paintings. I mean, Jesus is just kind of the best at love. So how in the world could his disciples love each other just as Jesus had loved them? Jesus knew, of course, that they would fall short. But he also knew that love is powerful, even when it comes through imperfect vessels, like his disciples and like us. Because loving like Jesus seems like such a high standard, it might be worth considering why Jesus gives this new commandment. I think it's because Jesus knew that his disciples would need to remember how he had loved them. They had just spent the last 3 years in the powerful, loving care of God incarnate. You can imagine that that was pretty great. But now he was leaving, and they needed something to remember him by. But what could he leave them? Jesus knew that the only way they could keep that love alive was by trying to imitate him in love, by loving each other. They were being called to a kind of love that would change them, and in the process would change the world. Jesus told them that if they had love for one another, everyone would know that they were his disciples. I fear that too often we Christians are not so well known for our love as we should be. But the waters of baptism remind us of our call to love. The waters of baptism remind us how Jesus wanted us to love, how that love would be a beacon for all who need light in dark passes. The kind of love that Jesus wanted for us, for his disciples, becomes an all-encompassing power. God's powerful love becomes both our centering truth and the path on which we walk. God's love becomes the air that sustains us and the voice of the divine that calls us forward. God's love is woven in and around and through our beings. And in baptism, that love becomes tangible in the sacramental waters. As I said at the outset, today is a day for celebration. We celebrate that our community is growing because we have more people with whom we can try to follow Jesus' commandment to love one another like he did. We celebrate that Kalia has responded to God's call to her to enter the waters of baptism because in baptism we receive God's gracious empowerment. In baptism, we are empowered by God's love to live out our call in the world. So let us rejoice and be glad in the one who welcomes us to love. Amen.